Facebook, etc. I don't feel that actually when we broadcast live on Facebook and it's just silent meditation, you won't believe this. Facebook thinks for some reason that we're plagiarizing something and banish us. They have that reaction to silence. But now we're being live streamed. And I'm going to go ahead and reading number 12.10 in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Gotama Sutta. Mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, I thought, alas, this world has fallen into trouble. It's born, grows old, dies, passes away, and is reborn. Yet it doesn't understand how to escape from this suffering, from old age and death. Oh, when will an escape be found from this suffering, from old age and death? We were practicing this morning, contemplating about anicca in terms of the aging and death of the bodies and the change and deterioration of the world. And feeling that there is an aspect of it which indeed is painful and sorrowful. One thought that I have when I read this about the Bodhisattva is that he had such integrity that believing that it's possible to find an escape from this suffering, then he plunged ahead with such courage and determination to pursue his quest to find the escape from suffering. A person who is lazy could just ignore the suffering and just have the kind of worldly equanimity of someone who's just too dull to even notice what the trouble is. Or someone who has a pleasure-seeking temperament could try to run away from this suffering by going faster and faster around the circle of trying to cover up their anxiety with sensual pleasure. And so it's the honesty and determination and righteousness of the Bodhisattva that made him pursue this quest. Then, he says, then it occurred to me, when what exists is their old age and death. What is the condition for old age and death? The condition is called paccaya. What comes before? Kim means what? What condition? Then, through rational application of mind, I comprehended with wisdom. So this is the Bodhisattva's yoniso manasikara. And then with wisdom, the higher understanding came to him. When rebirth exists, there's old age and death. Rebirth is the condition for old age and death. Just this one insight is it's referring to the birth of living beings, you could say, but it's very close to the exclamation that was given by the disciples when they heard the teaching and when the Dhamma eye opens for them. And they said, whatever has the nature of arising, all things that have the nature of arising also have the nature of ceasing. It's impossible for anything to arise and never to cease. In the contemplation of the Lakkhana, the three characteristics, the three universal characteristics of existence which are always true. The first one is anicca, which is the teaching of impermanence, and that's really the same teaching here. Then it occurred to me, when what exists is their rebirth, continued existing, grasping, craving, feeling, contact, the six sense fields, name and form, consciousness, sankhara. So let's look at each one and not just skip over them the way it's done here with the ellipses. So the birth of beings, going backwards, is conditioned by bhava, which is here translated as continued existence. It's sometimes translated as becoming. And they say that one cannot just refer to becoming as a completely abstract generality, because one always becoming is when you are coming into some realm of existence. So if you're going to become an angel, become a human, become Mara, become a great king, become a tiger, become a monkey, that's when you become something. And so this is considering, explaining, or investigating what is the inner workings of the cycle of rebirth. And the Buddha is seeing that for some reason the beings have landed into some particular realm of existence. That's their becoming. And then having landed, they're born. When what exists does continued existence come to be, or when what exists does becoming come to be? And the answer is grasping, or upadana. So the person could be, or a being going around through the cycle of rebirth, could be compared to a monkey swinging among the trees, and they swing off of one branch and they grasp onto the next branch, and they don't let go without grasping onto the next one in order to stop themselves from falling. This is similar to the psychology of sensual desire. If a person is seeking after pleasure and happiness, they may grasp after something that makes them happy, and then when the thing that they've grabbed doesn't work any longer and it's not giving them the same happiness anymore, it's kind of like it's used up, then the person who's addicted to sensual pleasure reaches after the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And that's the reason why sensual pleasure has an addictive kind of a quality, because a person who's oriented to pleasure is afraid of the cessation of pleasure, and so they have to keep on grasping onto the next one in order to protect against their fear. Or if you think of grasping in terms of status or a position, this is a person may feel comfortable if they know what their position is. When I was a child, I was the fourth out of five children in a family that had 5 children and a mother and a father and 4 grandparents and various aunts and uncles. And I always knew exactly what my position was in that family. And then the mind was very comfortable and holding on to that comfort of having that stabilized kind of position. That's one reason that then when the family members and the relatives start dying and dropping off like flies, then one feels an existential threat because one has made an identity out of those relationships. Or you could say, if you have a certain position in the world, according to your job, your position or your title, your race or your nationality or your age, it can be that in one way, if you have seem to have stability in that position, then you feel comfortable. But if that position is not stable, if you lose all those things and become a refugee, then how traumatic it is that all of the respect that you had before has disappeared and you've tumbled down to the bottom of the pecking order. Or if you were an intelligent, well-educated young person and you joined the monastic form and became a novice in the monastic form, and you start to be treated like a baby, and you don't know what to do, you don't know how to act, you don't really know all the protocols, and everybody is telling you what to do, and everybody is bossing you and telling you, giving you advice. So then it can be very disorienting and upsetting because of losing that position. So these are some examples of the kind of things that one can grasp after. But then in the very end, at the deepest, most innermost level, we have the psychology that creates the delusion of the self, and we grasp after that identity. So, because of that grasping, conditions the becoming. So whatever you are holding on to is going to condition into what kind of existence one might be reborn in future. Okay? Grasping conditioned by tanha, that's thirst, that's craving. So the difference between craving and grasping, so craving has got a lack, craving for sensual pleasure that you don't have, craving for some kind of nutriment of life that you don't have, craving for the security of a position that you don't have, craving for a rebirth in heaven that you don't have. So the craving then has that quality of instability and I guess the dukkha associated with that instability and that lack. And then when grasping onto something, for a second, you might think that you've solved the problem, that you've come out of the instability of craving into the stability of having something, but you don't really have it. It's not really yours. And whatever you think you have is becoming otherwise. Whatever you think you've become is becoming otherwise. Now, the Bodhisattva, in his reflection, in his yonisa manasikara, in his investigation, this is like looking within to see how the human being works, how the mind works, how the psychology works, what drives us, both within the present lifetime and also in the endless cycles of rebirth. The sutta doesn't say whether this particular sutta is happening just before or just after the Bodhisattva began to gain the direct knowledge of the previous lifetimes and the direct knowledge of how beings are born, pass away, and are born according to their karma. But it seems to me that he's describing in a more analytical way the very same process that's described as being one of the higher knowledges that was gained by the Buddha in the process of awakening. So seeing the full extent of this whole process of dependent origination or of causation is almost a synonym for the wisdom arising with the enlightenment of the Samma Sambuddha. Vedana, that's just pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling. And the feeling is conditioned by the tendencies, pleasant feeling by the tendencies for grasping, for craving, for sensual desire, the unpleasant feeling by the tendency for aversion, and the neutral feeling by the tendency for ignorance or delusion, that provides the fuel for craving to arise. This is why, as we were speaking before about what a fruitful and beneficial area for vipassana is this investigation into Vedana that came up in this morning's meditation class. And the Vedana is said to be the result of all of the conditions that have happened before. And the arising of craving is said to be a choice, something that we may choose to allow or to pick up that craving, which then puts another fuel into the spinning of this wheel of samsara. But if with the Vedana we're able to just stop and let the Vedana be the Vedana, it doesn't necessarily have to lead on to tanha. But when the beings are trapped in the cycle of rebirth, it's because the Vedana did lead on to tanha. And where the Vedana came from, it came from the contact with the six senses. This is sort of on the boundary between just the physical living body and the operation of the mind, that with the six sense bases and the corresponding mental abilities, there comes to be contact of the senses. And again, this is a tremendously fruitful place for vipassana, whereby instead of simply jumping to the conclusion, unpleasant feeling, I don't like this, or pleasant feeling, I love this, instead to be more scientific, investigative, more curious, more wishing to understand. And when the Vedana arises, saying, you can just look back just that moment. When a Vedana comes, you can look back just in that moment and see what was the contact? What caused that to happen? And sometimes you can see it, or sometimes you can see it in real time. That you see something and that reminds you of something, and a certain memory or a perception gets triggered, and from that perception some feeling arises. Or else there's some kind of contact in the body that's unpleasant. Stomachache arises, or a headache arises, or aching in the bones or aching in the knees, and just when that contact arises, the mind suddenly jumps up and begins to proliferate with some kind of a story about it, and that story was fueled by some kind of a feeling. So if you can, the faster you can see it, the faster the energetic fuel for this cycle of rebirth is able to be chopped up and to lose its momentum. The contact is arising from the 6 sense fields. That's seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. And those 6 sense fields are an aspect of name and form, nama, sometimes referred to as including all of the aspects of mentality, feeling, perception, mental advertence or attention, are some of the aspects of mentality. And then the rupa is that physical thing, that living body, which is comprised of the elements of the solidity of the earthiness and the liquidity of the water element, and the fire element, and the air element, and the body, which is born through some material process, born from an egg or born from a womb, and which is made up of rice and food, so that living body together with this mind is one way that they summarize a living individual. It's kind of a summary word for a person or a living individual. So then this is arising because of consciousness. I think in this case, I might like to take this jnana, which is knowing, and this vi, which is a separate kind of knowing or a special kind of knowing. And there are many different aspects of vijnana. Sometimes vijnana is just called just another synonym for the mind. Sometimes the vijnana is called the rebirth consciousness, which is the way of knowing that knows all of like my stuff as relating to me and as being able to be perceived with a separation from your stuff. So just the way that perception can tell the difference between red and blue, just the same way this vijnana, especially this rebirth consciousness, this vijnana which is affected by upadana, that's affected by grasping, is a vijnana which is seeing and perhaps even obsessed with the difference between me and what is not me, and the difference between what's inside and what's outside of the self. So in that case, what does the vijnana know? Well, it knows the form, feeling, perceptions, the mental formations, and holds those things all together as being a self. So in that sense, you could see why vijnana is kind of like, sort of like a mistake that's fueling this cycle of rebirth, what the Bodhisattva was looking at. We obviously, one could spend many months or even years investigating and contemplating what the significance is of the 12 steps of dependent origination as it's been laid out in this sutta and in many other suttas, and then some other similar versions of different aspects of fragments of the cycles of causation that you see in different suttas. But in this case, the interest, what the Buddha is interested in here is, let's take the question, what was the question at the top? Was the world has fallen into such a trouble, it's born, grows old, dies, passes away, and is reborn. So this is what he's investigating here. And in this case, the vijnana and the consciousness together are associated with how it is that a sentient being comes to be born, comes to arise in the world, and also continues to exist in this world, especially continues to exist as an apparently separate individual. So there's said to be a interaction between this vijnana, this knowing factor, and this name and form, which is all of the aspects of the physical individual and all of the other aspects of the psychology of an individual, which are able to be known by vijnana, by that consciousness. Then, when what exists is their consciousness. And here, the Pali word is sankhara, which Bhante Sujato translates as choices. Sankhara has a wider meaning in terms of causation of everything that's subjected to being affected by cause and effect. So even in this case, he's interested in particular in the operation of karma. So karma is a law which is subjected to cause and effect. So because of certain choices that a person makes, they accumulate a pattern, a karmic pattern, which then tends to be self-perpetuating. They will tend to perpetuate that individual down a track wherein they'll have certain kinds of experiences, certain kinds of birth in the future. So in particular, with the selection of the word choices, Bhante Sujata is pointing to karma as what has conditioned the arising of this particular vijnana and this particular nama rupa that arises at some particular moment in time. And we can see that this karma has a very long history that we cannot even find the beginning of the sequence of cause and effect, the karmic choices. So we may reflect on how many times in the past I have done good deeds and how many times in the past I have done bad deeds. How many times, even when I was an animal, how many times did I kill? How many times did I commit acts of generosity? How many times did I develop wisdom? How many times did I have a chance to meet enlightened teachers or enlightened Buddhas in the past? how many times, how many times it's endless. But then all of those causes and conditions mature into the present moment. So my sense of this particular sentence about avidya pachaya sankara sankara pachaya vijnana, that the karmic choices condition the arising of this consciousness, what we know in this moment. Then through a rational application of mind, I comprehended with wisdom when the cause, the condition for the formation of karma, and that is ignorance, not knowing. And in this case, in particular, not knowing the escape. So ignorance is the condition for choices. Choices are conditioned for consciousness, and so on. That's how this entire mass of suffering originates. Origination. Such was the vision, knowledge, wisdom, realization, and light that arose in me regarding teachings not learned before from another. And then it occurred to me, when what exists is there no old age and death. When what ceases, do old age and death cease. And then he goes through the same sequence with subtraction, taking away cessation. So, if there's no birth, there's no old age and death. If there's no becoming something, there's no birth. If there's no craving, or if there's no clinging, there's no becoming. If there's no craving, there's no clinging. Some students are become a little frustrated or confused about how a fully enlightened arhat can exist. How can he decide that let's go to Savatthi or let us sit for meditation, let us go for alms round, if he's beyond sankharas? How can he be a living person with a lifespan left if there's no six sense fields and no name and form? How can he know that there's a being in the world who's got a little dust in their eyes who would benefit from the teaching of the Dhamma if he doesn't have the knowing faculty of consciousness? How could he choose to teach the Dhamma if he doesn't have the capacity for sankhara, for making choices? And so in all of these cases, we will have to say that there's some kind of a separation has been made where the craving and clinging for existence has withered away. And long before that, the craving and clinging for sensual pleasure has withered away. So then there's a residue of the capacity of a living being which is no longer tied up with that craving for existence, with that craving for sensual desire. And then for the remainder of that lifespan, that person can go on. So again, it's going through this cessation, coming down to how this entire mass of suffering is ceasing. This is the third noble truth, the cessation of dukkha. Elsewhere in the description of the Four Noble Truths, it speaks about how the I is dear and delightful in the world. Whenever there's a delight and relishing for the I, that craving lands there and settles down there. That's the arising of dukkha. And so on with all of the sense bases, the physical form, and all the different aspects of mentality, where there's relishing and delight, then the craving settles down, it lands and stays, and that's the arising of dukkha. And then for the cessation of dukkha, it says, the I is dear and delightful in this world. If the relishing and delight is not arising, then craving doesn't land and doesn't settle down there. And this is the cessation of dukkha. And likewise for all of the aspects of all of the processes of the living being. So this is my understanding, or one way of expressing cessation: vision, knowledge, wisdom, realization, and light that arose in me regarding teachings not learned before from another. So this is the Buddhavago Patamo. This is the first teaching about Gotama. What can we do? We should try to have the same courage that the Bodhisattva had. We should not be overwhelmed or become traumatized because of old age, sickness, and death, or because of all of the intensity of dukkha that's experienced in the world, or even because of all of the unskillful qualities that we can see either in ourselves or by looking around in the world. We can see that beings are so overwhelmed with greed and confusion that humans make so many mistakes. We're capable of so many wrong turns, but nevertheless having the courage to look. And now we were born in the age when we have the teachings, the Dhamma is still been passed down to us, and we can reflect along the lines of what the Buddha describes as the way that he applied his mind to reflecting on what's the nature of what we can experience as a human being. What we can experience as keeping us going around and around, or what we can experience and know and understand that causes that wheel to stop turning. I invite comments and questions right now. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. You'll notice in this sutra that the beginning, right, Buddha first defines what is suffering, just like the Four Noble Truths. Then later on he says, such is the origin of the whole mass of suffering, right? The second noble truth. Then he ends the section on cessation, such is the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. So this is the prerequisite for the Buddha and all the Buddhas of the past, that they have to see this dependent origination and how it connects with the noble truths. But what Buddha hasn't found yet here is the path, the way, okay? And so what he does is he reflects on his life, what got him up to that point, and he sees those path steps, right, leading up to samadhi. He's perfected samadhi to the fourth formless experience, but that was not cessation. That's where he gets the idea there's got to be something beyond this. And later on when he finds it, he says there's no escape beyond that fifth level of cessation. And so that's why it's called cessation. Cessation of what? I prefer to translate as cessation of sense perception. So he goes in there and he's able to experience the cessation of sense perception. And because he has this knowledge already developed of the first three stages of the Four Noble Truths and this dependent origination, he's able to make that complete leap. Ignorance is overcome. It says ignorance is banished. Light, it's like, light arose and darkness is banished. He gives that example. Because if you notice in here, there's no cause for ignorance. And he says in other sutras that there is no first cause of this ignorance, right? It's gone on infinite time. There's no beginning, there's no end, right? So but ignorance itself is not really a thing. It's an absence of a thing. True knowledge is a thing, right? A falsehood is nothing. It's just a concept, just words we put together and make, reality. So, but something that's real, you can have true knowledge of that. So darkness is nothing. It's an absence of light, right? So when the sun rises, that space that was formerly dark is now full of light. So that's the true knowledge arises, and darkness was banished, ignorance was banished. And so, this is really a fantastic sutta, because it shows how the Buddha is, by his own ability, right? His yoniso manasikara, he's looking, how to become free from this, and he actually finds the way, to free himself. So, anyways, I hope I didn't talk too long, but I just wanted to express that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's one other thing. You mentioned vijnana is a synonym for the mind sometimes. I know this is a doctrinal thing, but I think this is a mistake, because that example you gave of the monkey going through the trees and grasping one branch after another, in that sutra where Buddha describes that, he describes three things that he's grasping after. Chitta, states of mind; mana, this development of, this is mine, this I am, this is myself; and vijnana, cognition. So it's like the cognition part, the first two are equated with mind, but the cognition part is not really equated with mind. It's more of an activity of mind, in the sense of, you think, oh, I want to go and see a beautiful sunset. You want to, that's what you're grasping after. I want to go to the beach and see the beautiful sunset or something like that, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. It's your mind grasping of, okay, I want to have this cognition. I want to have that cognition, this cognition. So I don't think it's so much directly a synonym of the mind. I think it's one of these three processes of the subtlemost grasping principle. Yeah. Anyways, that's what I wanted to say.
Usually we see chitta, manas, and vijnana used in different contexts in relationship with different kinds of functions of mentality, different aspects of what maybe in our English language we don't have the same way of classifying them. From time to time, you see in our sutta where those three words are appearing together in the same sentence. That seems to be referring to some kind of a totality that includes all those ideas together. But it's quite true that they appear in different ways and have a different purpose. Even a lot of that's why consciousness is such a bad translation, because a lot of the things that we attribute to consciousness is actually what in Buddhism is attributed to conceit, or attributed to perception. So we can just take the terminology, but to know that there's many different words in Pali that have that root nya or ja or nya, which is related to knowing, that are used in different contexts. And we do see vijnana sometimes appearing in a context that's attributing a longevity to the individual. So the scholars say that the reason why we think that, like me when I was a little baby and me when I'm an old person, is the same individual. Why? Why would they don't have very much in common, but vijnana seems to make them into having a continuity. I'd like to call on Rawanti.
Thank you, Ayya. So when you were starting the sutta, you kind of gave a little introduction, and you mentioned usually for the problem of old age, sickness, and death, our reaction is usually either distracting ourselves with sense pleasure or ignoring. And I find that to be a very powerful statement. So just want to make that comment.
Very good. Thank you. The yoni and yoniso, the literal meaning of yoni is the womb. And in this way, it's like the Buddha is looking for what's the previous cause, and the previous cause below that, and the previous cause below that. And in that case, he's very much trying to do this quest to see, like, what's at the bottom, trying to get to the bottom of this puzzle of human suffering. So that is one of the meanings of yoniso manasikara, is thinking in a way that is looking for the underlying cause of whatever happens. Try to understand the cause. So I'm going to take these last few minutes and read you the other sutta that I selected for today. It's kind of the same story, but it's got a beautiful metaphor. So I'm going to come to that. Uh, on page 601 in the hardcover book. This is the Nagara Sutta, which is called the city. At Savatthi, mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening, I thought, alas, this world has fallen into trouble. It's born, grows old, dies, passes away, and is reborn. Yet it doesn't understand how to escape from this suffering, from old age and death. Oh, when will an escape be found from this suffering, from old age and death? Then it occurred to me, when what exists is their old age and death, what is the condition for old age and death? Then, through proper attention, that's yoniso manasikara, I comprehended with wisdom. When rebirth exists, there's old age and death. Rebirth is the condition for old age and death. And that's going through exactly the same sequence we just discussed. Through proper intention, comprehended with wisdom. When consciousness exists, there are name and form. Consciousness is a condition for name and form. When what exists is their consciousness, what is the condition for consciousness? Then, through proper attention, I comprehended with wisdom. When name and form exist, there's consciousness. Name and form are a condition for consciousness. Then it occurred to me, this consciousness turns back from name and form and doesn't go beyond that. This is the extent to which one may be reborn, grow old, die, pass away, or reappear. That is, name and form are conditions for consciousness. Consciousness is a condition for name and form. Name and form are the condition for the six sense fields leading to contact, and so on. This is how this entire mass of suffering originates. So I had mentioned to you before that the consciousness and the name and form come into a loop, a mutual loop of mutual causation. And many people would not see anything previous to that. It's just through the wisdom of the Sammasambuddha, able to see the previous kammas, the previous sankharas that have come before this pair, and then able to see the extent of the ignorance that precedes the formation of past kammas. Origination, such was the vision, knowledge, wisdom, realization that arose. The light arose in me regarding teachings not learned before from another. And then it occurred to me, when what doesn't exist, is there no old age and death? When what ceases, to old age and death cease. Through proper attention, I comprehended with wisdom. When rebirth doesn't exist, there's no old age and death. And then methodically, going back through the same sequence, this is another aspect of yoniso manasikara. It is a methodical awareness. So it's awareness looking back to the causes, but looking in a methodical way, in an intelligent way or in a rational way, not just having everything remain as a jumble, drifting around based on our feelings or something like that, but instead with that radical aspect. And again, through the cessation of all this sequence of causes. When consciousness doesn't exist, name and form don't come to be. When consciousness ceases, name and form cease. Then, when what doesn't exist, is there no consciousness? When what ceases, does consciousness cease? Then through proper attention, comprehended with wisdom, when name and form don't exist, there is no consciousness. When name and form cease, consciousness ceases. Then it occurred to me, I have discovered the path to awakening. That is, when name and form cease, consciousness ceases, and so on, with the same sequence of causation. Now the metaphor, this is what I wanted to give you as a special treat since you've listened so patiently. Suppose a person was walking through a forest. They'd see an ancient path, an ancient route traveled by humans in the past. Following it along, they'd see an ancient city, an ancient capital, inhabited by humans in the past. It was lovely, complete with parks, groves, lotus ponds, and embankments. Then that person would inform a king or their minister, "Please, sir, you should know this. While walking through the forest, I saw an ancient path, an ancient route traveled by humans in the past. Following it along, I saw an ancient city, an ancient capital, inhabited by humans in the past. It was lovely, complete with parks, groves, lotus ponds, and embankments. Sir, you should rebuild that city." Then that king or their minister would have that city rebuilt. And after some time, that city was successful and prosperous and full of people, attained to growth and expansion. In the same way, I saw an ancient path, an ancient route, traveled by fully awakened Buddhas in the past. And what is that ancient path, the ancient road traveled by fully awakened Buddhas in the past? It is simply this noble eightfold path. That is, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right immersion. Sama ditti, sama sankappo, sama vacha, sama kammanto, sama ajivo, sama vayamo, sama sati, sama samadhi. This is that ancient path, the ancient road traveled by fully awakened Buddhas in the past. Following it along, I directly knew old age and death, their origin, their cessation, and the practice that leads to their cessation. Following it along, I directly knew rebirth, continued existence, grasping, craving, feeling, contact, the six sense fields, name and form consciousness. Following it along, I directly knew choices, their origin, their cessation, and the practice that leads to their cessation. Having directly known this, I told the monks, nuns, laymen, and lay women. And that's how this spiritual life has become successful, prosperous, extensive, popular, widespread, well proclaimed, wherever there are gods and humans. So I really appreciate Richard for pointing out earlier on in this hour how the first sutta that we read had the first three noble truths. without mentioning the fourth, and how this sutta brings out a wonderful metaphor for the fourth noble truth, for the path that any of us can follow, leading to this same result. Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. There's something very strange about this sutta. When he's describing the dependent origination, he stops at, I prefer to cognition, okay, and then it talks about how it's dependent with name and form, like you were saying, it's like a loop. But the problem with a loop is you'd get stuck there, right? It's an endless loop. How do you get out? But at the end of the sutta, he talks about sankhara. And it makes me think that this sutta may have somehow gotten a corruption in it or something like that. Because all of a sudden sankhara just kind of, as cognition is dependent on sankhara, just suddenly pops up, which wasn't mentioned in the earlier part of the sutta. So, or it could just be that at this particular time of this sutta, when he saw this idea and everything, he hadn't gone that far back yet. And then at a later time, he went sankhara to ignorance. So, but it's a very curious turn of events here.
Yes. The classical form of the 12 steps of dependent origination then becomes sort of like a good neighborhood, and it then always gets mentioned in total. But then it's also possible that the students who have learned the full sequence, when they hear a part of it, they think of the entire pattern. And so that's also a possibility, or it could be a corruption, or it could be that this doesn't really explain, and I didn't get to the commentary to find out what the circumstance when this sutta was told, that for the purpose of that audience that he was speaking to, that they were not able to see into their past lives, so he didn't burden them with that portion of it. I see I've got two hands up. I've got Ananaya and Patipada. So I'm going to call Ananaya next.
I wanted to just mention too, or I didn't catch her the same as Richard, but one thing that's important. This is Bhikkhu Bodhi's The Great Discourse on Causation, the Maha Nidana Sutta, and page 9 of the introduction. And if you go to, that page especially, and then towards the last paragraph, and what he's doing is, Bhikkhu Bodhi is pointing out that there isn't an absolute quid pro quo independent origination. The whole thing, it doesn't go if this to this to this to this. The birth and death absolutely connect, and that's irrefutable. But the other parts of it, what he says is, there are places where it doesn't line up like that, and if it didn't have those, or I should say, if there were not these possibilities of intervention or places where it doesn't have that same kind of relationship, the other factors, you'd never be able to get off the wheel. You would just be having this, as Richard pointed, you'd have this continuous loop. So there has to be points where there's a departure. And in this sutta, what's different about it also is that the Buddha starts at the end at 12 and goes backwards. And then he comes forward again in pointing out how things are connected, how they arise, but how there isn't this absolute connection in the same way as if you have birth, you have death. It seems like maybe an abstruse point or whatever, But what I got out of it was, though, the most important thing is that you had to have some places or a place where you wouldn't have this absolutism. Otherwise, you couldn't get off the wheel. You have to have that point. Anyway, you might want to everyone might want to have a look at that. Thank you.
You're welcome. My feeling about dependent origination is that it's very much the tale of like individuality going around and around. And when the thing that breaks is the perception of the individuality.
Eventually, yeah.
And then when that breaks up, then actually every step of the circle is free.
Yes.
And so it's not, they often point out like between Vedana and Tanha, that's an opportunity, but actually every step of the way, there's
Yes.
the opportunity for the
Break it up.
penetrating wisdom to say it's not personal and to just drop, like get off the merry-go-round. Do you have a comment?
Well, what I wanted to ask is this. My understanding.
Wait a minute. I'm gonna let Patti Patel speak to the mic.
My understanding is that every time we hear "Thus have I heard," it's the Buddha talking to a specific person, is it not? Or am I wrong? So these things aren't concrete sequential. He's talking to one person, they're at one place, another person, they're at another place, and he meets each person where they are. So for us to expect a concrete sequential document maybe is not realistic.
But that's the point. It isn't.
Well, by taking the mass of phenomenon and during the conceptual boundary around different aspects of it, putting a frame on it, which enables us to see in a different way. Those definitely are concepts. And it's not, the main point is that these concepts, the reflecting on these concepts, integrating into our heart, or observing with our own experience through the lens of these concepts, could cause a person to let go of grasping, could cause a person to let go of clinging, could cause a person to let go of their self-conceit and to just be able to step back from that, to be free from the poisons, and to become free and to experience everything from a perspective of equanimity and freedom, to be overlooking everything that's experienced in a way that has got that even quality and that free quality, and also that this cessation of consciousness, that would be the most terrifying thing of all for an ordinary person. Saying, oh no, don't let me listen. I mean, I don't mind cut off my hand, cut off my foot, cut off my ears, but don't cut off my consciousness. That's the terror. It's like it's the one thing that we're really holding on to. But by doing this contemplation, which is framed in this way with these concepts that got these kind of lines drawn around the boundaries of these different concepts, gives us a way to think about it, that we can go beyond fear and that we can relax the death grip that we've got about hanging on to consciousness. Yeah. Okay. Okay, on there. You're muted. You're muted.
Last fall, when I was ill, I was having hallucinations for really the second hospitalization. I wasn't there at all. But it's really an interesting thing. It's like, so what is consciousness? So what part of what was still part of my mind was creating a completely parallel world? It had elements of what was really happening, like I was in the hospital in part of the hallucination, and there were people in my life who were there, family or friends or whatever would pop in and out. But it was like, where was that coming from? Now, illness can do that. I mean, what was happening with me can affect the brain, and you can, in fact, have an encephalitis. So it's quite serious. But I mean, but the fact of what was happening in my mind or consciousness at this was totally different than what was happening in so-called reality. So it's and I guess one of the things that's happened for me is it's maybe not quite so 100% that this is the only way there is, or this is the only place there is, or something. I'm still kind of working through part of that, but anyway, just offer that as an additional way to experience. I hope you don't experience it, frankly, but to what it can show, or what can lead to, hopefully, from having had that experience.
Okay, thank you. I think I might like to let Supatra have the last word.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ananya, and everyone who joined. I from what I understand from studying is that this particular sutra clearly point to the source of suffering as being avijja, or number one, the lack of knowledge, like Richard say, lacking. And that meaning that everything, once you have, or all of us have a lack of knowledge, then everything else follows that leads us into this cycle of suffering. And so as we were asking each other, like, how do we break up? How do we break up? At the end of the day, the absolute breaking off is becoming a arahat, and that's when they are entirely understand or have the entire knowledge that Buddha is pointing to as a truth, right? So that's what we are doing. We are studying and trying to understand this teaching. And at the end of the day, with everything else that we try to let go, including, be doing good karma and what else, at the end of the day, the way to reach that level of enlightenment is understanding entirely, thoroughly, both experientially and intellectually, the cause of the sufferings. And when that happens, our lack of knowledge becomes knowledge. And that's in Pali, it's the panya, or the wisdom. And everything we're doing is really trying to reach that wisdom.
Yes, thank you. You said it perfectly. So let us pay respects to the Triple Gem. Aram Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thank you, everyone, for your practice and for your patient listening and discussion today.
Thank you, Ayya.
Thank you.
Thank you.